हुस्न सारे जहां का सिमट जाए उसमें, छू जाए जिसके रूप को सबा ब्यूटी सो, हम हुस्न को सबा कहते हैं।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers. I'm your host S.M. Hali, presenting another version of Defense and Diplomacy. The Parliamentary Committee on National Defense and Security has tabled the recommendations for revisiting the terms of engagement with the United States, with NATO and ISAF, and also it has made recommendations for reviving, or rather revising, our foreign policy. To discuss that, we have invited in our studio today Lieutenant General Talat Masood. Thank you. And we have with us Advocate Tariq Pirzada. Sir, the Parliament is already discussing it. What are your views about the recommendations?
Well, I think this is a very good start in the sense that previously, as you are aware, that the Parliament was never truly consulted in that sense. And now it is more or less a shared responsibility. And this is where, the sense of the House can also be seen, and the aspirations of the people can be reflected in the foreign policy, because the people who are making these recommendations are the representatives of the people. And I think they have come out with some very solid recommendations. And obviously these are going to be debated, and there would be a general consensus which would be developed. So there will be a great ownership of the foreign policy. And the previous allegations that were being made that it is only the establishment which makes the foreign policy, which then doesn't give it that content and that strength which now would be there, because it will also have the full backing of the civilian government. So that is one major aspect. Then I think what they have also tried to do in the past, because we had military rule, and especially President Pervez Musharraf, he did not formalize many of the agreements and many of the understandings which took place between him and the US and NATO forces. So now they are trying to formalize those. Then they are also seeing to what extent certain policies in the past were detrimental to the interests of Pakistan. And they are trying to sort of redefine them, and that is why you have these 16.
We'll come back to the content in a little while. Let me solicit the opinion of Advocate Tariq Pirzada. Basically, this exercise was started when the NATO forces attacked the Pakistani checkpost at Salala, and it killed 24 of our soldiers who embraced Shahadat. And Pakistan not only stopped the NATO supplies, but also endeavored to revisit its ties. But now Pakistan is demanding that the United States and NATO make an unconditional apology and a number of other things. How do you look at it, sir?
Well, apology is one thing, but the fundamental national security interest of Pakistan has been hampered by the fact that the policy was never formally backed by the people of Pakistan. There was no proof of that. So a tangible backing will now be behind a policy, and the good advantage of that would be, just to give you an example, when the U.S. talks about when the the Obama administration talks about U.S. Congress, well, the Congress does this, does that, we cannot do anything. This is exactly what will happen in Pakistan. We will also be able to say that there is a voice of the people, just as the voice of the people in the United States is behind the Congress. There's a voice of the people behind the policies being adopted by and passed by the Pakistani parliament. It's not just a governmental view, it's not an executive's opinion. So there'll be limits drawn, and conclusions will not be also drawn in Washington that we can go and force them to mend their policy at will, like they did, as General Saab said, during the Musharraf administration.
Coming back to the Musharraf administration, there are, speculations, and maybe they are true, that things like the attacks by the drones and so on, only a tacit approval was provided. Bases were provided to the United States forces, including air bases like the Shamsi Air Base, Jacobabad, and so on, without even taking the Ministry of Defense into consideration, what to talk of the Parliament. So from now onwards, there is going to be a proper formulation of policy, how this is going to come about. How do you look at it, sir?
Well, one thing is certain, that as far as the bases are concerned, I don't think Pakistan under any circumstances will provide a base to the United States or NATO. Firstly, they will probably not provide. And even if they did provide for logistic purposes use of certain Pakistani bases, the ownership of which remains with Pakistan, that would also be under some formal agreement. Then as far as the drones are concerned, I have a feeling that they will say, and they have been saying that all along, whereas I think it may have certain tactical advantages, but if you look at it in a broader context, it's extremely counterproductive, because it gives rise to a lot of militancy. It encourages the militants to have go for a lot of propaganda, and it also alienates the people of that area.
And because of the collateral damage, the militants have been propagating that these people are your enemies, so you come and join us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what happens is that the Pakistan government and the Pakistan military is then compromised, because US is our partner and NATO is our partner in the war against terror. And then if the partners are attacking us, then what sort of allies are they? So I think there is also a moral and ethical and a psychological component to the use of drones, which is extremely adversarial as far as Pakistan is concerned.
Yes, and as far as the Parliamentary Committee on National Security is concerned, its exact words are that the US must review its footprints in Pakistan, of course, alluding to the drone attack. Talking about the NATO supplies, the Parliamentary Committee has recommended, and it is being debated in the Houses of Parliament, that the NATO supplies must be taxed, firstly. Secondly, 50% of these must be carried on Pakistan Railway. What is your opinion, sir?
Well, these things are those things that can be negotiated once we have settled a fundamental issue between the United States and Pakistan. You see, the issue of 300 drone attacks and the drone attacks that will happen in the days ahead, not only until 2014, but if the US bases stay in Afghanistan, they might continue for another 10 years until 2024. So we're talking about a serious problem. Number two, a state just cannot exist if a state, and it's a general rule of political science and of common sense also, and that of strategy as well, as if the sovereignty of that state is not protected and respected, both of these things. Number two, this is happening as a result of the drone attacks at the present time. Slow and steady dismantlement of Pakistan's sovereignty in the eyes of whom? Not only in the eyes of the people of Pakistan, but also in the eyes of the rest of the world, and that damages Pakistan irreversibly. So that point is very important. Number two, when you come and bomb the territory of a country, the people living in those areas, in this case the tribal area of Pakistan in particular, and other areas where ground interventions have taken place, after 10 years of constant bombing or intervention, the people of that area belonging to that country might draw the conclusion that maybe the state cannot protect us. So that sows the seeds of secession in any country that would happen. So the most important thing for Pakistan is that before we settle the issue of NATO supplies, this issue of drone has to come to an end, and the solution lies in US giving drone assets to Pakistan. And if they can't trust Pakistan, then the whole debate is a non-starter. So I'm not talking about being stubborn. I'm talking about protecting Pakistan's sovereignty on the one hand, and then, because as General Saab said, we are a partner in the war against terror, we will facilitate, and then the next point would arise.
Right. And there is a very important mention of the presence of espionage agencies in Pakistan. And of course, it is alluding to the Raymond Davis affair, the Osama bin Laden affair, in which Dr. Shakil Afridi and a couple of others have been branded as CIA agents, and the presence of CIA as well as other agencies in Pakistan. Pakistan wants it formalized and not without its permission.
Right. Firstly, I think Pakistan wants to reduce the intelligence footprint of the United States in Pakistan, because I think they had extended the footprint to a very disproportionate scale, which was not desirable at all for a sovereign state to accept, and is unacceptable. That's one point. The other is that whereas, superpowers and major powers do have intelligence agents, but they are supposed to be benign in that sense, that they are not supposed to be actively pursuing certain things in another country, because that again is impinging on your sovereignty. So I think that is also totally unacceptable. So firstly, Pakistan is wanting to know as to which exactly, although they will not probably tell you that which intelligence agents are coming to Pakistan, but there are maybe in the diplomatic corps you have one or two people, just as all other countries have one or two people as diplomats in other countries.
Undercover.
Undercover. That is a different matter, and that is diplomatically acceptable. But anything more than that, I think is totally unacceptable. But if you want intelligence cooperation at the operational level, then I think it is very important to give the particulars of those individuals, and then with mutual agreement place Americans or NATO people in Pakistan in certain places where it is for the benefit of Pakistan, for working against those who are using Afghan sanctuaries or Pakistani sanctuaries, and because of their advanced technology and because of the satellite information and all, they can provide useful information to Pakistan. And similarly, reciprocal sort of facilities be provided to Pakistani intelligence people to operate in Afghanistan and other places for the same purpose that is being provided to the US.
Right. The other aspect which the Parliamentary Committee has recommended is that the United States government owes a lot to Pakistan in the head of the Coalition Support Fund.
Yes.
And Pakistan is also demanding, because of the energy shortage it is facing, an agreement which the United States, on the same pattern on which the United States has made with India, the nuclear civil power deal. So do you think we are justified in this?
Well, on the one hand, as far as the financial issues pertaining to U.S. operations in Pakistan are concerned, that should never be disputed at issue at all. Pakistan has to demand a reasonable, amount, and the United States has to pay that. And if support has to continue, because it has to do with everything. A, it's a matter of principle. B, it's a question of having strong road structures in Pakistan that have been devastated as a result of the almost free, logistics movements through Pakistan, and Pakistan stands to gain and not in any manner. So, A, the United States has to pay back everything that it owes without any delay. All the huge amounts that they owe in terms of coalition support fund. B, for the future movements, new rules can be renegotiated, and that is perfectly legitimate. And number three, I do want to point out that if a mistake was made by the Musharraf administration in terms of not charging properly for over 6-7 years, I think we need to talk that issue and raise that issue also, and ask for the back payments as well, because it's the people of Pakistan we are talking about whose interests have been damaged. And if you have picked up a dictator to help yourself, well, you have been helped, but the people of Pakistan have not been. So let's talk a little in a retrospective manner.
Right. Talking in the realm of reviewing our foreign policy, the committee has recommended that we must further cement our relations with China, which is a tried and trusted friend, and also reach out to Russia and other states. What's your opinion, sir?
Well, I think it's an excellent idea, because we must balance our relationship with other countries. We can't just rely on the US and the Western world. We must, now there are different centers of power which are emerging, and especially China is becoming even far more important with its economic strength, with its military potential, and also the fact that it is, in a way, the most important player in the region, in the sense that it is the most powerful in economic terms. So, and globally it would be influencing the world economically for a long time to come, even if not militarily. So, and it is Pakistan's neighbor. Its interests with Pakistan converge. So I think from that point of view, maintaining good relations with China is in Pakistan's foremost interest. At the same time, I think improving relations with Russia is also very, very important. Russia has shown an inclination, because now it does not only want to have good relations with India, it also wants to have good relations with Pakistan. And it realizes that Pakistan is wanting to have an independent foreign policy, so that suits, because previously we were too close to the US and NATO, and now it realizes we are trying to change. So that is very helpful. I will also say that we should also develop a very good relationship with all our neighbors, and the movement towards India, towards Iran, towards the Muslim countries, Central Asian countries, is all in the interest of Pakistan. Pakistan cannot afford to be isolated. Pakistan needs friends in order to support it in terms of trade, in terms of commerce, in terms of diplomatic support for its just causes.
Right. So, Advocate Tariq Pirzada, what's your opinion on the review of the foreign policy?
It's a very constructive move to have a foreign policy reviewed by the parliament.
And please remember, before this recommendation came, the parliamentary committee had a number of sessions with the representatives of Pakistan in various capitals. These envoys were invited to Islamabad,
right,
and their input is very much in this recommendation.
Right, yes. So on the whole, it's a good, constructive move to have a solid foreign policy. But because the parliament has yet to debate every piece of it, these are just recommendations. These are not fine prints of any foreign policy. So we have to see what comes out with the backing of different parties that will be debating it. I hope a serious debate goes on this issue for at least 30 to 40 days, that people have to take the issue very seriously in the national security interest of Pakistan. It's not a party issue, it's not a parochial issue, it's the issue of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, with whom do we have to have our very solid, deep-rooted relationship. In my case, as General Saab has also said, China is number one. That is the priority number one, uncompromisingly, regardless of what the consequences are. Number two, our relations with the region. Kabul, someone said, is the most important capital these days, because the problems that we have of the wars in the last 10 years, or rather the two wars in the last 30 years. So Kabul has to remain as the centerpiece of our policy to stabilize the situation in the region. We don't want to be seen to be interfering, but at the same time, we got to protect ourselves while we protect the interests not only of Afghanistan, but also that of the whole region. So Pakistan, remember, Pakistan is the fifth largest demographically, is the fifth largest country in the world, and the largest Muslim state between here and the Atlantic. Despite all the problems, we are a nuclear state. There is a potential. It cannot be written off. So let's stay focused. The problems are here, but we cannot be scared by them.
Right. Your final comment, sir.
Well, I think there is no doubt about it, as Tariq Sahib has said, that we have huge challenges. We have a challenge of economy, we have a challenge of terrorism, we have certain other issues as well. But I think we are moving in the right direction, and we need to strengthen our institutions. We need to sort of have a foreign policy and a defense policy which is commensurate with the aspirations of the people, and it brings peace and stability in the region. So I think we will have to work towards that. And if we are internally strong, if we build ourselves economically, if people look at, if the world looks at us with respect, it will only happen when the people of Pakistan are satisfied, when the people of Pakistan think that they are getting justice, they are getting having a good economy in the country, the institutions are strong, they are getting justice. You will find that that would be reflected in the attitude of the foreign and neighboring countries.
Your final comments, sir, very briefly.
A lot of people are looking at Turkey as a model. But remember, the respect for Turkey was known as a sick man of Europe. But today, Turkey is one of the most respected countries in the region. And the reason, because it took a huge meteoric economic rise, and that's where the secret is.
Right. Thank you. So viewers, with that we come to the end of this very intense debate. The topic is such that it generates a lot of interest. But both our panelists agree and they recommend that the foreign policy of Pakistan, as well as our terms of engagement with the United States, NATO and ISAF, must reflect the feelings and the wishes and the aspirations of the people of Pakistan. Because there's a Latin proverb which says, vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. Thank you so much, General Talat Masood. Thank you so much, Advocate Tariq Pirzada. And viewers, keep watching us and hope to see you next week, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.